Update: my sister and brother-in-law wanting to take my camper for my nephew to live in. Things went bad. Original post: my sister and her husband fell on hard times because of the pandemic. They went from renting a nice house to having to rent a room from a friend. It was supposed to be temporary, but they've been in his house for an entire year, and he didn't have more than one room to spare to rent to them. I have a family on my own, and my house is full, so I didn't want them living with me. But I have a vintage camper trailer in my backyard, one of those small ones they called a canned ham type. It had various repairs over the years, including redoing the floor and ceiling, as well as getting a new axle. And it's in a pretty decent condition for being over 50 years old. I take this camper on yearly trips with friends and on camping trips with family, and I'm very anal about its upkeep. My sister, though, has asked to borrow the camper numerous times to put in her friend's backyard so her teenage son could have some privacy and use it as a personal bedroom. But I know my nephew. He's destructive with everything and would turn my camper into a total mess. And I'm certain they wouldn't want to give it back whenever I need it because he'd already been living in it. I know they can't simply go out and get a camper of their own because the one in usable conditions are not cheap. And right now, they're trying to save every extra dime to get back on their own feet. Recently, my sister has gotten our parents involved, and they think I should just lend them the camper. But I've still refused. They won't let up and seem to think that if they keep hounding me as a collective that I'll give in. But I haven't. My wife is on my side and has refused to let my sister and brother-in-law in when I wasn't home. They have a vehicle that can tow the camper, so I don't trust them to not take it if they can get in my backyard. My house also has cameras, and my sister and brother-in-law are aware of them now. They say I'm the a-hole because I only use the camper a few times a year and they need it now. But I worry that they wouldn't want to give it back, much less return it in the same condition. I firmly believe I'm in the right, but with my parents and sister constantly breathing down my neck, I thought I'd come here for an unbiased opinion. Am I the a-hole for not lending them the camper? Info: I did suggest they get my nephew a tent, but they shot the idea down and called a tent temporary. If anything, that just felt like another red flag to me. More info: our parents do not live close anymore. They moved several states away to retire a few years ago. Now for the top comments before reading the updates. Not the a-hole. Obviously, it's not like they're asking to borrow it for a few days. It would be indefinite, and like you said, he's messy and destructive. No way I'd let them take it. Honestly, even if the nephew weren't messy and destructive, the very fact that it would be for an indefinite amount of time would do it for me. This isn't a camper just rotting in the backyard. This is something OP uses. So if he wants to use it while nephew is still using it, guess who would lose out? Not the a-hole. I think you are correct in believing that you would basically be giving them the camper. It is pretty bad that they seem to be considering stealing it from you. It is not much of a solution to their real problem. Of course you are not the a-hole. This is another one of the many posts that are, you have XYZ. I need your XYZ. Give it to me. There are so many unbelievably entitled people out there. You would not be the a-hole even if you never used your camper. It is not even the give it to me. It's the screaming and name-calling and the verbal abuse to try and bully the other person into giving in. Now for the first update. I showed my sister and brother-in-law this post after getting the verdict. My parents have seen it as well, and they are all very unhappy with me. But my parents have backed off and they say they won't bother me with it again. I also spoke with my sister alone and went through the rough estimates of what possible repairs to the camper would be should my nephew damage it. My sister was not happy to see those numbers. Then I called her out on how they'd likely not want to return the camper when I need it. They also tried to come to my house when I wasn't home to take it without permission. And I told her I'd have no problem calling the police if they ever try that. My sister still tried to say her son needs the camper, but when I went through the comments on this post with her, she became incredibly embarrassed and then got very angry. She left saying she won't bother me for the camper anymore, but still stated she thinks I'm a jerk. I didn't reply because I knew she was waiting to gaslight me. Just waved her goodbye and she left. My brother-in-law called me shortly after to yell at me, but he had no leg to stand on other than they want it. I told him I'd contribute $100 for a tent, but they're on their own feet for the rest. They actually agreed to the $100, so I guess my nephew's getting a tent to live in. I'd like to thank everyone here for all their great advice. You gave me what I needed to end this problem. Now for the last update. Hi everyone! A few days ago, I saw an animation of my old post on YouTube and decided to log back on and give everyone an update. But I couldn't do it in the original sub where I first posted it and tried to post in another sub that banned me. So I've come here instead. I just want to say that things seemed to get better after I made my sister and brother-in-law give up on borrowing my camper. If they'd gotten their hands on it, I likely wouldn't have gotten it back anytime soon, short of getting police or a lawyer involved. They even tried to show up at my house to take the camper while I wasn't home, and my wife had to keep them out. I showed my last post to my sister, brother-in-law, and parents, and they were furious at me, but let go of the fact that my camper was not up for grabs out of sheer humiliation and embarrassment. They had no real logical way to argue with me, especially after I brought up the amount of money that could end up being owed to me in repairs should they or my nephew damage the camper. That part made my sister extra sore at me. I thought we'd close the book on this whole mess, but it seems closing one book only opened another one. Things went downhill very badly, a bit over a month after my original post. So badly that I couldn't believe it was really happening. And yet it did. Many here may not believe it either. But here's what happened. Some wondered if my sister and brother-in-law were going to actually use the $100 I gave them to get my nephew a tent to have his own space in the backyard. I admit I had my doubts, but they followed through on getting him one. Our parents sent them some money as well, and they got my nephew a good-sized tent that he can have a cot to sleep on in, and a small amount of simple furniture. I personally donated a cot as I had an old Coleman one sitting in my garage unused for years. I gave him a folding camping chair too. The boy got electricity in the tent via an extension cord from the main house. However, he frequently complained about heat during the day. It only had a couple of those little pseudo-air conditioners that you just put water in to keep his tent cool. Though honestly, I doubt the situation would have been any different if he had my camper because it can get pretty hot inside of it too. Now on to what happened a bit over a month later. My sister and brother-in-law were evicted from their friend's house. Apparently, while there was trouble with my nephew needing his own space and being messy and defiant, they were having more trouble with a friend who was also their landlord. They tried to smooth things over by putting their son in a tent so he wouldn't be in the house much to avoid trouble. I suppose that might have worked, had my sister and brother-in-law not been caught with illegal drugs. And I mean the very bad ones, the kind that uses a syringe. Their friend/landlord went into their room while they were away and found their stash. That's why they were evicted. Suddenly, it made sense why in 2 years they couldn't afford a small apartment to move into despite both of them working full-time. Their extra cash just went right to their habits instead of saving it like they claimed to have been doing. Looking back, they did look a bit more unhealthy at a time, but I assumed it due to stress. And not long after being outed, their habits put them behind bars. People who are on these heavy stuffs can go very wild in an instant, and that's exactly what happened. When their friend/landlord gave them an eviction notice for having found a stash in his house, my sister and brother-in-law both got physical with him, and he called the police. That scared them, and they locked themselves in their rented room. Meanwhile, my nephew was blissfully unaware of what was happening as he was just gaming alone in his tent. The friend/landlord pressed charges, and police soon arrested my sister and brother-in-law because there were indoor security cameras that caught the whole altercation. I was very surprised about what happened when I heard about it. I got a call from the police station, and I was asked to take in my nephew since he could no longer stay where he was. Since our parents are states away and living in a retirement community, they couldn't take him in, so it was up to me. And I did so. I wasn't particularly fond of my nephew, but I realized this upbringing really did not help our relationship, nor did the fact that my sister and I don't really get along. We brought his tent over to my place and set it up in my backyard. He's still living in it, even though we've cleared the attic out for him. But he says he likes the tent better because it feels like his own little house where he can just be himself. We've even added a mini fridge I bought used in there for him so he could have cold drinks when he wants them. Currently, we're still working on becoming my nephew's permanent legal guardians. My sister and brother-in-law are both facing heavy charges, as they assaulted a man, resisted arrest, and were in possession of illegal stuffs. From jail, though, they've actually been very cooperative, albeit while dealing with withdrawal from no longer being able to self-medicate. I've been to see my sister, and she said she and her husband were so out of it on the day it happened. They don't even remember attacking their friend. I don't know if they're faking memory loss to try and get a lesser punishment or if they really were that high. But I suppose it doesn't matter. It changes nothing since there was CCTV showing the attack. They are looking into possibly getting a plea deal when they go to court in November. But even with that, they may be in prison until their son is over 18 at least. I didn't have the heart to risk the foster system on my nephew. My wife has had my back on this too, and we've been working as a team. My sister and brother-in-law have signed over the title to their SUV to me, and the plan is to make it my nephew's vehicle when he gets older since he'll be 18 in 3 years. Or we can sell it to get him something that uses a lot less fuel. I already had to pay to get the SUV back from the police impound. That's money I know I'm never going to get back. When my sister and brother-in-law get out of prison in a few years, they're not exactly gonna have much to their name. So taking care of their son and making sure he grows up in a better environment feels like the least I could do. For those wondering about the substance use, it wasn't entirely out of left field. My sister was especially troubled in her teenage years and struggled with addiction in her early 20s with the same stuff. She nearly got kicked out of college for it. Our parents always just dug her out of the mire and helped her back on her feet. They even paid for her rehab. We all thought she'd be clean for a long time. But she admitted to me when I visited her in jail that her husband also had the same addiction issues. That's actually how they met. Not in rehab, but in a focus group after the rehab. They did not admit this to any of us until recently. Not sure why. But with the stress they faced in the past 2 years, falling back into old habits became easy for them. I've tried checking up on their former landlord to ask if he was okay. However, he wants nothing to do with my family. He had some pretty offensive things to say when I went over to gather my sister and brother-in-law's stuff. Once police gave me the okay, and the man actually threatened to pull a gun on me while I was carrying out boxes. He said he thinks my family are all alike, a bunch of filthy white trash C-words. So I don't feel as sorry for him as I did since he's a pretty big jerk. My nephew also confirmed this. My kids weren't exactly receptive of their cousin being around them. There's a bit of an age gap between them and they just don't relate to one another. And while my nephew is messy, we make him clean his tent once a week. And we make him shower at least 2 to 3 times a week. We live in a warmer climate, but now that the seasons are changing, it's cooling down a little bit to where he says the tent isn't so bad. He's got a tablet, a laptop, a DVD player, and a Nintendo Switch to occupy his time. But we keep these things in the house whenever my nephew isn't home. It's way easier to steal out of a tent than a house after all. Considering how angry my nephew was before, he rarely shows his temper now. Yes, he makes it hard to get him to do his chores, but as a whole, he's shown more improvement in a couple months than I saw in 3 years. He is extremely grateful, but is also very solitary. We give him his space most of the time, but I make sure my kids don't bother him either. He's going through a lot right now. My nephew plays a lot of Zelda and Fortnite. At least those are 2 of the games he plays that I know of. My kids love those games too. We've also given my nephew the old 10-speed road bike I used to use years ago. He rides it to and from school, as we live about a mile away from the local high school. Thus far, most of the drama from him has been school-related. He had to change to a different high school and make new friends, which he wasn't particularly happy about. He really doesn't like doing his homework and has been fighting with his teachers. But that's a problem many parents face on the regular. He says he's made a few new friends though, and I'm thankful for that. We're taking things one step at a time, and so far, it's slowly getting better. My nephew has also talked of one day getting a part-time job. For the record, he brought this up himself, not me or my wife. He says he needs to be ready to be independent when he's 18, but we wouldn't kick him out just for getting older. He's one of our kids now too after all. But if he's willing to work hard and move on to working full-time or going to college, we'll encourage him. I just don't want him ending up like either of his parents. He seems to be far better off mentally without their influence now anyway. It makes me regret not wanting to take him in sooner, but I didn't know how bad things really were. To think this all started because my sister and brother-in-law wanted my camper for their son. And those of you who said they potentially wanted it to skip town if they'd gotten a hold of it, you may very well have been right. They were on thin ice with their landlord, and falling ever deeper into their bad habit. Thus far though, my nephew has been completely indifferent to the camper even though his tent is practically right next to it. He says as long as he has his own space, he's fine. It reminds me of when I was his age. I enjoyed hanging out and spending nights in the old shed my parents made into a playhouse for me and my sister when we were kids. But we are still required to have a room at the ready for my nephew whenever a social worker checks up on us. He has the bulk of his stuff in the attic room, but chooses to stay in the tent, which the social worker didn't seem to mind since it was my nephew's preferred place to hang out, so long as an actual room was available to him. We also have a 7-foot-tall privacy fence all around the backyard and cameras too. That helps my nephew feel safe back there at least. So for now, I think we have things covered. I probably won't update again as it's pretty much a guarantee that my sister and brother-in-law are going to be locked up for a few years. Our parents are especially mad at them about it and have thanked me to no end for taking my nephew in. They want to fly over to visit this Christmas so we can all spend time as a big family for the first time since before the pandemic. And before I go, I know some are probably going to ask where brother-in-law's family is in all of this. Couldn't they help? Why didn't my sister and brother-in-law ask them for help? Well, the answer is they couldn't. I don't know a lot, but brother-in-law spent the latter half of his own childhood in the foster system. His family aren't in his life. I don't know who they are or where they are, but he hated them so much that he actually took my family name when he married my sister. So they aren't involved whatsoever with my nephew. That went in a completely different direction than I thought it would. His sister and brother-in-law were totally going to sell the camper for these. Or as someone said in the comments on his original post, sell stuffs out of the camper and fund their habit. They already had the SUV to tow it. And now I'm imagining it like a food truck for these. Anyone else surprised that they actually used the $100 to buy the kid a tent? Or do you think they scammed the parents as well to make a bit extra to go into their veins? I'm a little surprised they got him the tent, but I guess they wanted him out of the room while they were shooting up. It was a tent, or their friend was going to evict them. Sounds like Nephew was on someone's last straw.